Good morning, everyone. We are seeing some more daffodils this morning in preparation for us to talk about the second part of Chapter 7 on single-factor designs and research. So, welcome back to Research Methods Psy290, and we will be talking about a lot of the other specific examples that were given in Chapter 7, both the ones that are in the book and the ones that I put on the PowerPoints about my particular piece of research. So basically, all we're doing in this chapter from here, except for a little bit about different types of control groups, is giving you a little more experience, a little more examples about these single-factor designs. Okay, so one of the articles that they mentioned is the Bransford and Johnson study. On the actual title of the paper was contextual prerequisites for understanding. Okay, and this is pretty topical in the sense of you know what the word prerequisite means. Okay, you're registering for courses for next semester, so you know there are prerequisites for some courses. So, for example, for you to take research methods, you had to take Psy290 or statistics before that. So statistics was a prerequisite for Psy290. Okay, that seems pretty simple, right? Well, what we mean by prerequisite is something that you need beforehand. Okay, and that's what Bransford and Johnson were looking at in their particular line of research. I mentioned, the other chapter. If you have some sort of context, if it's a situation where you have a title and then you see a list of words, you will encode those words better than if you're not given that context beforehand. And basically that's what Bransford and Johnson did. Okay, they gave you this passage essentially about doing laundry. It's very ambiguous if you don't have the title of doing laundry. But if you're given that passage title of doing laundry, then read the passage, you encode the information better, okay? And then you remember the information better. You will remember that passage better, okay? Then if you are never given the topic. Now, what was really interesting, what makes this a nice example of three levels of one independent variable, is given the context afterwards. Right? So if you're given the context afterwards, you still have the context, right? So that should help. But if we talk about like a mini Psy100 lecture on memory, we have encoding. That is how you get the information. Is you have storage, and then you have retrieval. So if you have the context at the time of retrieval or getting that information back out of memory, well, that should help, right? At least some. But that's what Bransford and Johnson found, is that it didn't help at all. You had to have the context at the time of recording. You had to have it beforehand. You needed it pre-reading the paragraph. So again, context, contextual prerequisites for understanding simply means that you have to have the context first. Having it later, after the passage has been encoded, doesn't help any more. Is actually not statistically significant than not having the context at all. Okay. So this also is, again, they talk about this in terms of falsification in the book. They're ruling out the possibility that context helps at the time of retrieval. The other thing that this points out is what you would need for this particular study. The statistic would be a one-way analysis of variance. They ran this as a between subject study. Okay, so one person was either the groups were either having the context, not having the context at all, or having it at the time of retrieval. All right, so again, any participant was in one of those three groups, so it was between subjects. So this would be a one-way between subjects analysis of variance. And the other thing that to keep in mind when you're talking about one-way analysis of variance with more than two groups is if there is a significant effect of the independent variable. In this particular case, it's like context. You then have to do a post hoc, like a Tukey, or Newman-Coles. You then have to probe where those differences are. So it could be, given these post hocs, it could be that context before was better than context after, which might have been better than no context at all. That would be one way that you would have hypothesized this came out. But that again, was not how the results turned out. There was no significant difference between context after and no context at all, but there was a significant difference between context before and those other two groups. Okay, so again, I hope that's a bit of a reminder from Psy290 and the idea of again, what the main effect is, or what the F value tells you, is that there is a main effect, and then you do the post hocs to see where the differences are between the groups. Okay, I've got one other example of context, so you can play around with this if you have friends that you're still living with, or if you want to do this in some sort of conference way. Okay, so here's another passage. Again, I'll give it to all of you without context, and then maybe you can figure out see what the context is about. Okay, so here's another Bransford and Johnson type of paragraph without context. Now, 3 sturdy sisters sought proof, forging ahead, sometimes through calm vastness, yet more often through turbulent peaks and valleys. Days became weeks as doubters spread fearful rumors about the edge. At last, from nowhere, welcome winged creatures appeared, signifying momentous success. Okay, so without context, you're probably trying to figure out what that's all about. What are these winged creatures? Are they dragons? What is the edge? All right, I won't tell you. All right, I'll actually have you Google this. If you Google 3 sturdy sisters, okay, it will come up right away. Okay, and so you'll know what this actually, the context of this passage is supposed to be about. Again, very ambiguous as is, but as soon as you get the context and then you read it again, it will make sense. Okay, again, this will give you another sense of the context before, context after, and no context at all situation. All right, so that's one of the other examples that they give you in the book. The Stroop task, I gave you a link to the Stroop task. You've probably been exposed to it, maybe in Psych 100, but if you haven't, do it. Okay, it's really interesting. It's really a classic study in psychology, and you'll see why exactly there would be more than two conditions here. Okay, and in this particular case, it is going to be within subjects, because you want to compare the control conditions to the color naming condition, where the words and the color that the word is printed in and the word that is being read in terms of the color, okay, is going to be different. So you'll actually really feel the difference in this particular case between the two these different conditions, and why there would be a control condition in this particular case. Okay, the inerrancy study, I'll let you just read about it on your own as well. The other thing, the 2 examples from my research that I just mentioned, I think it's pretty straightforward. The ideas of the concept maps, okay, how concept maps may help intro psych students, learn the information better. So I did this with Jeffrey Nevid, one of the, one of the most popular intro book textbooks out there. Okay, so we use, the independent variable was the concept map condition, whether the student got a concept map at all or just the text of the information, the concept maps that were completely done, and then a concept map where the student would have to fill in certain blanks in the material of the concept map. Okay, so those are the 3 conditions. Dependent variable was the number of multiple choice questions that they got right out of 6, and also we had some other measures such as attitudinal measures, how much they actually liked using the concept maps. All right, as you will read about in the PowerPoints, we did not get a significant effect of concept map. We were really hoping that fill in the blank would do better than the completely filled in one, and certainly better than the text condition. Okay, so we didn't get that interactive boost that we were really hoping for. Okay, I think you can figure out why that might be the case. Okay, we only used 6 items on the multiple choice test, so basically what really probably happened here was a ceiling effect. That is, everybody did pretty well on a 6-item multiple choice test. Okay, so that was a bit of problem with us is that we did not, have a more sensitive dependent variable in this particular case. So we had these ceiling effects that really did not, show that there would be a difference. In terms of attitudinal scales, people actually did like using the concept maps, which was the effect, the significant effect that we did get. So we were encouraged by that. That if you do have something that you like to use, you're going to be more likely to use that. All right. And the other study that I cite that from my research was the stereoacuity in athletes study. This was, again, we treated this as a between subjects design. We used 3 different types of athletes: lacrosse players, wrestlers, and non-athletes. So again, in this particular case, so we do not randomly assign people into these groups. Okay, we're using an ex post facto design. Okay, we're using a participant characteristic variable. We aren't randomly assigning people to play lacrosse. All right. So in this particular case, there's self-selection to the groups basically. So these are we're going to use this as if it is a between subjects variable, but again, we don't have that random assignment into groups. Right. So what we found out by using this technique of trying to measure how well somebody uses binocular disparity. Binocular disparity, the quick version of this is whenever you have some sort of 3D viewer, like a stereoscope or your ViewMasters or the red and green glasses, you're using binocular disparity. So I'm not going to be able to go into a whole lot of detail about that, but basically some people will be able to use this cue of depth called binocular disparity better than other people. And what we found is that the stereoacuity for the lacrosse players was actually the best. Okay, so the threshold here was in minutes. Okay, the only thing that I think might be confusing is obviously you're used to minutes being a measure of time. Minutes in this particular case is 1/60th of a degree. If you think back to your trigonometry courses in high school, so we're talking about how small the visual angle is between the 2 pictures. In the right picture, what goes to your right eye, what goes to your left eye, and that amount of disparity is, the lower that number is, the better you can use binocular disparity cues. Okay, so what we found out was that lacrosse players did have the best stereoacuity, but what we also found was that there was no difference between the wrestlers and the non-athletes, which was, again, not consistent with our hypothesis. So, again, we found the main effect of type of athlete. Then we did the post hoc to see, where the differences did lie. In this particular case, lacrosse players were better than wrestlers, were better than the non-athletes, but there was no significant difference between the non-athletes and the wrestlers. Okay, so again, we could have had more than these levels, but we picked these three levels. One, because the lacrosse players really do need a lot of depth perception. Wrestlers shouldn't need depth perception, but it's not as far into the distance. There's a lot of closer contact with wrestlers, and then we thought that would be better than non-athletes at all. Okay, so hopefully that clarifies the PowerPoints. Again, in the test we talk about the idea of falsification in the Bransford and Johnson situation, just trying to figure out where the context does help. So again, you're ruling out with the Bransford and Johnson study, you're ruling out that the context helps after the passage is given to you. Okay. Quick thing, the other remaining issue in that chapter is the idea of yoke control groups and weight control groups. I think that's pretty clear. If not, you can let me know. But weightless control groups certainly, in the news lately, because we're trying to do clinical tests to try to figure out what does help the COVID-19. Is there some sort of treatment for that is going to be successful? And the yoke control group simply means that you want to make sure that each of the people in the control group have the same basic experience as people that are in the level of the independent variable. But again, the only difference between the two is the manipulation of the independent variable. Okay, so that's going to wrap us up for chapter 7. Okay, stay safe, everybody. We'll talk to you in a little while and do chapter 8. Thanks. Bye.